Why do humans pray? A person can spend years saying they do not believe in God, but when the airplane begins shaking, the diagnosis arrives, or someone they love may not survive the night, something strange can happen. They pray, sometimes silently, sometimes desperately, sometimes to a God they are not even sure exists. Why does prayer change reality? Or does it change the person praying? For billions of believers, prayer is not merely positive thinking or a way to calm down. It is communication with God. It is the belief that someone beyond the visible world can hear fear, gratitude, confession, anger, and hope. But prayer does not look the same everywhere. Some people speak in their own words. Some repeat sentences preserved for centuries. Some kneel, bow, chant, sing, whisper, repeat a sacred name, or sit in complete silence. Not every tradition understands prayer in exactly the same way. Yet, across cultures, humans repeatedly turn their attention toward something beyond themselves. And that raises a strange possibility. Maybe prayer is not one behavior at all. A person begging for a child to survive is not having the same psychological experience as someone giving thanks before a meal. Confession is different from praise. Lament is different from surrender. Silent contemplation is different from asking for a specific result. They may all be called prayer, but inside the mind they can be completely different events. Researchers once asked 350 people to report on their prayers and emotions every day for 2 weeks. Altogether, they collected 4,437 daily reports. The content of prayer shifted with the person's life. Positive events were linked with more thanksgiving and adoration. Difficult experiences brought different forms of prayer. Prayer was not only revealing what people believed, it was tracking the emotional weather of everyday life. That helps explain why prayer often becomes most urgent when control disappears. When a problem can be solved, people act, they make the call, take the medicine, repair the machine, or ask another person for help. But some problems cannot be controlled. You cannot force a medical test to return with good news. You cannot command another person to love you. You cannot reverse the past or guarantee that someone will survive. Prayer gives the request somewhere to go when there is nowhere else to take it. Humans do not only search for control. We search for someone who might still have control when we do not. Uncertainty also changes the way people move. When the future feels unpredictable, behavior often becomes more repetitive and structured. The mind begins creating order through the body. Repeat the words. Follow the sequence. Do not skip the step. Return to the beginning. Researchers tested this in Mauritius with 75 Hindu women from the Marathi community. The women first completed a stressful public speaking task. Some then performed their familiar ritual inside a temple, while others sat quietly. The ritual group reported less anxiety and also showed lower physiological anxiety. The ritual could not change the speech they had already given, but it changed what happened inside them afterward. The experiment tested ritual, not prayer alone, but prayer often lives inside ritual. The words, movements, place, rhythm, and sequence become one experience. Sometimes the opposite of panic is not certainty. It is ritual. You may not control the outcome, but you can control the next line. For a few moments, uncertainty has a structure. The rhythm of prayer may affect the body more than most people realize. In a small study of 23 healthy adults, researchers measured breathing and cardiovascular rhythms while participants recited the Catholic Rosary and a traditional yoga mantra. Both naturally slowed breathing to roughly 6 breaths per minute. At that rhythm, breathing and cardiovascular activity became more synchronized, and a measure related to blood pressure regulation improved. The prayers came from different traditions, but the bodies entered a similar rhythm. This does not mean prayer is only a breathing exercise. It means some ancient forms of prayer contain physical patterns that can influence the nervous system. Long phrases slow the breath. Repetition stabilizes attention. Familiar words reduce the number of decisions the mind must make. The prayer becomes something the body knows how to enter. But prayer can feel like more than self-regulation. It can feel like a social interaction. In a brain imaging study, highly religious Danish Christians performed several kinds of prayer. During improvised personal prayer, they activated brain regions involved in understanding another person's intentions and mental state. Their brains processed the experience less like repeating words into an empty room and more like communicating with another mind. A scanner cannot reveal whether God was listening. It can only measure what happened inside the person. But for a believer, prayer may feel less like thinking about God and more like being with God. The person praying can be physically alone while the brain experiences a relationship. Another brain imaging study found that familiar silent prayer increased activity in the caudate nucleus, a region associated with reward and repeated practice behavior. The scanner did not detect God. It detected what prayer had become inside the believer's brain: familiar, meaningful, expected, and potentially rewarding. This may help explain why people return to the same prayers for decades. The words do not need to be new. Their power may come partly from being deeply known. Prayer can also change pain. In one experiment, 28 devout Protestants received painful electrical stimulation while performing religious prayer, and a secular comparison. During religious prayer, reported pain intensity fell by 11%, while the unpleasantness of the pain fell by 26%. But the most surprising result was not the reduction itself. Expectation predicted between 70 and 89% of the variation in pain ratings. That does not make the relief imaginary. Expectation is one of the ways the brain changes real experience. The source of pain can remain while the experience of suffering changes. Prayer may not remove the wound, but for some people, it can change the world in which the wound is being experienced. Prayer may also become a rehearsal for behavior. A person asks for patience and is reminded to become patient. They confess anger and become more aware of it. They pray for someone they dislike and briefly practice seeing that person as worthy of concern. The prayer begins as words directed outward, then returns as a standard for the person speaking them. Gratitude prayer can work in a similar way. Attention is limited. Whatever repeatedly receives attention becomes easier to notice. A person who constantly names what is missing may begin seeing life as a collection of shortages. A person who regularly names what remains may become more aware of food, shelter, friendship, safety, or another day of life. Prayer does not invent those things. It changes which parts of reality receive the spotlight. But prayer is not always comforting. Someone may ask for healing and watch the person die. They may ask for protection and still experience tragedy. Then prayer can create a second wound. The person may wonder whether they prayed incorrectly, lacked enough faith, were being punished, or had been abandoned. The same prayer that makes one person feel protected can make another person feel ignored. This is where prayer becomes almost impossible to test. When a prayer appears to be answered, it can feel like evidence. When it is not, a believer may conclude that the answer was no, the timing was wrong, or the purpose remains hidden. Science requires measurable outcomes and predictions that could be proven wrong. Prayer involves intention, meaning, timing, and a possible intelligence that cannot be placed under laboratory control. Researchers have still tried. One of the largest experiments studied 1,802 patients undergoing heart bypass surgery. Among patients who did not know whether they were receiving distant prayer, complications occurred in 52% of those who received it and 51% of those who did not. There was no measurable benefit, but among patients who knew for certain that strangers were praying for them, complications rose to 59%. That does not prove prayer caused harm. Knowing they were being prayed for may have created pressure or made patients fear that their condition was unusually serious. The study also could not test every religious understanding of prayer. For believers, God is not a medicine that must produce the same result whenever a particular dose is given. Still, controlled experiments have not shown that distant prayer reliably changes medical outcomes on command. So perhaps prayer is not a supernatural button. It may be a relationship, a ritual, a confession, a request, an act of gratitude, or a way of surrendering what cannot be controlled. Sometimes a person asks for the situation to change. Sometimes they ask for enough strength to survive a situation that may not change. Those are not the same prayer. One tries to move the world, the other tries to transform the person standing inside it. Collective prayer adds another layer. People speak the same words, bow at the same moment, breathe together, and hear hundreds of voices moving as one. Experiments outside prayer have found that acting in synchrony can increase cooperation by strengthening social attachment. Shared prayer may draw on the same human system. A person may begin praying alone, but the words connect them to everyone who has spoken those words before. This may be why prayer survives in an age of medicine, satellites, artificial intelligence, and brain scanners. Science has expanded human control, but it has not eliminated uncertainty. We still cannot guarantee love. We cannot prevent every disaster. We cannot escape grief. We cannot know exactly when we will die, and we cannot prove what, if anything, waits beyond it. As long as human beings reach the edge of what they can control, prayer will remain waiting there. For believers, this may be evidence that humans were created to seek God. For psychologists, prayer may reflect the mind's need for connection, order, hope, meaning, and emotional regulation. Those explanations are not identical, but they may describe different layers of the same human act. So why do humans pray? We pray because we are afraid, because we are grateful, because guilt needs somewhere to go, and because hope becomes difficult to carry alone. We pray when our hands can no longer fix the problem. We pray because speaking into the silence can feel different from suffering inside it. Maybe prayer changes reality. Maybe prayer changes the person praying. Or maybe for the people who truly believe, those were never two separate things.